Hello everyone, I'm Eric Sperling. Thank you for joining episode 2 of All in Education's Sepas. I would like to introduce today's expert panel. We have Stephanie Parra, Executive Director of All in Education, back with us. And joining us today, Dr. Chad Gestson. He is the Superintendent of Phoenix Union High School District, and Dr. Quintin Boyce, Superintendent of Roosevelt Elementary School District. Thanks so much for being here today. All right, yes, before we get into the panel, I do want to talk a little about All in Education. It is a local nonprofit organization that exists to build an Arizona where all communities have access to opportunity and justice. Now, their work is focused on strengthening the Latino community by closing the representation gap to build power, influence, and authority across Arizona boardrooms and classrooms. All in Education hopes to shed light on the issues most impacting our communities through this monthly series, Sepas. So you know, Sepas is a program focused on creating a space where real, thought-provoking conversations are had with leaders and community members working towards creating meaningful changes in the systems meant to serve our most vulnerable communities. Now, today's conversation will expand on how poverty is one of the most critical factors that impacts education and a student's academic outcomes. So before we start, the panel here, we can talk about solutions from our end, but it is pretty powerful to hear from someone on the experience side. Emiliano is a young man who was willing to share his story about how poverty impacted his education. Take a look.
Around 2004, that's when everything happened. Literally, I can remember it. October 31st, Halloween. My dad was struggling with the restaurant business. And then October 31st, he came home and he's like, I had some tias there waiting for us to help us move. So October 31st, we packed up and left that night and abandoned everything in Gallup and came to Phoenix. We ended up at my tia's house, and that was our first stages of poverty. I was in first grade, we got here, and it was hard for us because, you know, we actually lived in my tia's house for the first couple months, almost a year we were here. And there were 7 of us and she has 5 of them. So there was 12 of us in a 3-bedroom house. I had never realized this, but one of my brothers told me that we were considered homeless. We started moving around different houses, same area, Maryville, but we kept getting evicted and evicted. You know, there were days without water, you know, days without light, days without, you know, heat. We would go to my tia's house sometimes. We would buy gallons of water to shower, to put in the toilet. We would get home late and then it would get dark and we would have to turn on candles to do homework. The older siblings started taking, you know, responsibility of me and my little sister. My oldest brother was the one that kicked off everything for us. His name is Joel Espino. He is the first one to go to college in our family. My parents did was persist to do what they had to do to get to, you know, to get us day by day. At that point, we were living literally day to day, week to week, paycheck to paycheck. My dad was working 2 to 3 jobs at a time. My mom had to work when we first got to Phoenix. My mom had to get her first job. She had never worked in her whole life, and she had to get her first job here. And it was at a 99-cent store. Poverty impacts a lot, right? Why don't students want to go to school is the main question. Like, why don't they want to wake up? Or why can't they wake up? Why? Because they have to do, they have to live another day in poverty. They have to wake up and hope that they have something to eat. They have to wake up and hope that there's going to be light, that there's going to be something there, that their parents are going to be able to, go to work. Some parents don't have cars. And sometimes it's like they have to take care of their families, right? It's like, so the last thing sometimes the students want is to go to school. And people don't realize that. Like me personally working with students, a lot of students didn't come to me to talk about college because they were working. Because they had to support their families. There's 2 ways to look at poverty. You can see really big accomplishments, a lot of persistence, or falling back into the cycle. And education can push us out of that cycle sometimes. Like in the Latino community, in the low-income communities, marginalized communities, we need things now because we can't wait. Because we don't know if the next week we'll have water or the next week we'll have light. We want our kids to have a better future. We want our elderly to have a better future for as long as they can now. Like, people don't realize we don't want to live in poverty.
What a powerful young man, and we recorded that recently over there, and it's one of those situations where he got going and we all got emotional, and we can talk about it. We can talk about it from the solutions end, as I said before, but to hear it come from him, share that experience, so powerful. And so, Stephanie, we'll start with you. From your perspective now, the impacts of poverty and education, where do those two worlds collide?
Yeah. I mean, what a way to start this conversation, right? It is these stories. Mm-hmm. Over the last 12 plus years that I've been an advocate for education equity, and all of us have been doing this work, it is these stories that have driven us, because as educators in the field, we know that poverty is the greatest barrier to educational attainment. We know that when a child in a family is struggling with poverty, it makes accessing education and opportunity more difficult, more challenging. And so at All in Education, what we are trying to do is to raise awareness about the intersections that are at play between poverty and education, between these social factors that we are highlighting through this series, the social determinants of education, because it does stem beyond the four walls of a classroom and a school building. If we are not coming together collectively as a community to solve for these really systemic social determinants, it is all on the education system to solve, and it makes educating, it makes teaching and learning that much more difficult for teachers and education support professionals and administrators in the field. And so we know that we have to come together around solutions, but it is these stories that have driven my work and my passion to make sure that the Emilianos out there have access to opportunity. In Arizona, 55% of our K-12 population qualify for free and reduced price lunch. More than half of Arizona's student population. And that's the state as a whole, and I'll let these guys talk about their local demographics, which are higher. And across the country, 18.5 million people are suffering from deep poverty. They are 50% below the poverty line. So this is a real systemic challenge, and we have to come together as leaders inside of education and in the community around solutions. So I appreciate the conversation today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're going to get into those solutions here, but I do want to get perspective first. Ben, we're talking K through 8, we're talking high school here. So Dr. Boyce, let's start with you. Sure. Your perspective when talking about the intersection there of poverty and education, and how a student struggling at home, with poverty, coming to school, trying to succeed, versus someone, we just heard that story of who's not doing homework by candlelight or not worried about, where his next meal is going to come from. Just the differences and how that impacts education.
Absolutely. I appreciate the topic and appreciate being able to be here to share perspective. Simply put, learning does not happen in a vacuum. Many things don't happen in a vacuum. I think about our community at Roosevelt. We're the pride and heart of South Phoenix. We're 15 minutes south of downtown. We're a community of color. The majority of our families qualify for free or reduced lunch, roughly 90%. 9 out of 10 families do. And that means they navigate poverty. And we're really intentional to not look at that from a deficit perspective, but instead an opportunity. When one navigates poverty, that typically means that there's a gap when it comes to resources and opportunities. Doesn't mean there's an ability gap. And sometimes those ideas get conflated. And so for us, when I think about the K-8, back to the question, the K-8 experience, something tangible, something really important is access to a high quality early childhood experience. Like what happens before kinder. And what we see in our community is that so many of our students and families that navigate poverty don't have access to a high quality early childhood experience prior to kinder. Now, there's some really great experiences and programs that are out there, but when I look at it from like a systematic approach, accessible to every single kid, doesn't exist. That means that you're starting behind the starting block before day one. And that's like a real tangible example of the difference between families that navigate poverty versus those that don't. And the other really tangible example when I think about our community is navigating different insecurities, whether it's food insecurities, housing insecurities, clothing insecurities, like the basic necessities of life. So from a physiological perspective, it is hard, if not impossible, to be the best version of your academic self when your basic human needs aren't being met. And that's what we see firsthand in our community.
Hosting panels like this, sometimes you'll throw something at me that sends me this way, and I have to, like when you said 90%, that 90% of your students qualify for free or reduced lunches, that's incredible. Yeah. Dr. Gestson, I want to now shift to later on in a student's life, high school. So similar question. Where do you see that intersection of poverty? And I think you have some similar statistics that you can share as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we start with the sheer numbers of the city of Phoenix. You heard Stephanie talk about the free and reduced lunch rates for the state of Arizona. That means 600,000 students are living near poverty or at poverty in this state. Those are our children. That's our future. They're sitting in our classrooms and our couches, going to our churches and our local grocery stores and our local parks. 600,000. Dr. Boyce talked about his zip codes. He serves primarily 040, 042, and 041, 90%. Phoenix Union serves 32 zip codes. Inside our 32 zip codes, we partner with 13 elementary school districts. Some of those elementary school districts, 99% free and reduced lunch rate. The poverty in the city of Phoenix, all told, the K-12 system serves over 100,000 students on average. Our poverty rate is 90%. In the 5th largest city in America, with a lot of wealth, especially in the suburbs, our youth sitting in our classrooms today live at the poverty level. And I think what's just as scary, but it's an opportunity, I want to talk about that too, is that what we also know to be true is that the demographics of Phoenix Union are a 10-year precursor to the city of Phoenix in general. That's a 10-year precursor to the state of Arizona. If you can imagine the demographics, the level of poverty in Phoenix being Arizona in 20 years, that's a fundamental problem. But I also think it's important to double down on what Dr. Boyce said, that our zip codes aren't a problem. Our zip codes are an incredible opportunity. Our kids are brilliant. Unfortunately, they're forced to be resilient every day, but they are brilliant, and they just need us to invest in them, and they will make our future much brighter.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I get, when we talk about this, these guys are colleagues, they are friends of mine, and we can talk about this. But it really is about perspective, and I so appreciate what you all said, that there is no lack of talent in our community because we see it, right? We see the grit and the resilience and the brilliance of our community. There's a serious lack of opportunity. And so we want to be very clear when we talk about these conversations that our community, there's no shortage of talent, there's a shortage of opportunities, and that's really where the call is on leaders, whether you're a policymaker at the state level, leading a system, leading a school, leading a classroom, or a leader in the community, a business leader. We all have to collectively come together around solutions that are intentional and targeted in providing support to those 32 zip codes in Phoenix, because if we can get it right for kids in Phoenix Union, for kids in Roosevelt, for kids across Phoenix Urban Core, we can get it right for the rest of Arizona, and Arizona can truly be a model for the rest of the country.
Absolutely. So let's talk about roles and solutions now, and let's start with the school system. Like, everything we just talked about, what role does the school system play in this challenge?
So I think it's a great question. So poverty does not magically go away. And what I find myself doing when I engage with the folks that aren't steeped in education day in and day out, like the belief, the misconception is that for the community we serve, with the gaps we've identified, that we just do teaching and learning. And that's far from the truth. So we don't just do teaching and learning. That is our charge. But we also know when there are gaps in these other areas, you can't just do teaching and learning. And so we step up to the best of our ability as a community, as a school district, to fill those gaps, to fill those insecurities that I mentioned earlier. We know that as a school district we do our best, but we can't do it all. So when I think about Roosevelt, we have over 100 community partners that we shoulder up with. to help do that work both inside and outside of the classroom. It's not just taking care of the kid, but it's taking care of the entire family. When I think about our community, we're the largest employer in South Phoenix, which means the bigger, the better, the stronger, the healthier we are. Like, we have the opportunity to change the face of an entire community. So our job is definitely teaching and learning, but we take on the mission of taking care of the whole child and the whole family. And we know we can't do it alone. I think about some of the cool partnerships that we've engaged in when it comes to the academic journey and experience for a child. We want parents to be involved. We're figuring out how to do that better, which is why we're partnering with groups like All in Education. We think about the academic journey and experience as a family experience, but a two-way experience as well, because our employees, our staff, have and will learn a lot from our families. So our charge is to help cultivate amazing humans. That's academically, but everything else as well. And although it feels like at times we're not equipped or resourced to do that work, we do it all.
Same question.
Yeah, and I think I couldn't agree more. And what Quintin said is true, that the broader community thinks of school systems as the educational foundation of our communities, and that's true. But what's true today is that the school systems are the safety net, the social safety net of our entire community. As I've shared many times, that school systems today have become the full social service agencies of our communities. And all these issues that we talk about in poverty, when you step back and think about food, clothing, transportation, internet services, before school care, after school care, clubs, sports, tutoring, family opportunities, family classes, workforce development, that all happens in school systems today. We don't just educate children, we educate whole families, but we serve whole families. And the truth is, as Dr. Boyce said, we can't do it alone. In some ways, some days we feel like we're doing it alone. But what we know is that there are organizations like All in Ed, organizations like Dr. Boyce talked about, who understand that it's going to take all of us to understand the issues of our community, but again, the opportunities of our community to invest very differently.
If I can just jump in real quick, because I think one thing that you said as we were getting ready to have this conversation, Dr. G, is around how much investment Phoenix Union made in the community as a form of meals. Can you share a little bit about that with pandemic?
Yeah, we've shared with so many people that our families, many of our families rely on our services, especially food. For many of our children, it's the only meal they get. In the course of 1 year of the pandemic, we gave out 2.2 million meals. And these are families that have to come to school to get them. This isn't, you don't just grab them because they're right on the street corner. 2.2 million times families came to our school to get food during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Staggering.
It is staggering. And I think that, when I think about my role as a school board member at Phoenix Union, having to close schools was the hardest vote. I think I told you this. It was the hardest vote I had to take, because as a member on that board, and I knew going into it how difficult it was going to be for the families that we serve. Because they do rely, often they rely on the support systems that we've put in place for them and for their students and for their whole families. And I cried that morning that we were going to take that vote to close schools, because it was such a difficult moment that we were living in. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it is exactly this, that schools have been the backbone of communities that are our most vulnerable, are most in need for a really long time. And that is why for us at All in Education, it is important to start shaping a different kind of conversation when it comes to education advocacy, that it can't just be about teaching and learning. Yes, we need high quality educators. They need to be paid well. We need to invest in our school systems, absolutely. But we also, let's have a conversation about whole children and whole families and all of the challenges that they are grappling with, because all of those challenges are barriers ultimately to academic attainment. And we see it. We see it in the gaps in attainment. I mean, when the gaps in attainment are correlated with race and economic income, you know that there is a thread to be drawn here that we have to make sure that every single community, regardless of the zip code that you are in, that you have access to the support systems, the resources, and the structures in place to make sure that you can be successful in our communities.
I'm just curious, you guys mentioned the pandemic, and as we appear maybe to be coming out of the pandemic, how have your student populations been resilient through this, or has it been an extremely difficult process where now they're getting back into the school? But as Stephanie's saying, and we talked about this, it's almost like you're providing a lot of these social services, and without the school being there, how are the student populations prepared moving forward now?
You're spot on. So when schools closed for a period of time, it was extremely difficult. Like, we know how much support we provide for our students and our families. When students came back to school, so one, there's just an immediate excitement to be back. Yeah. But people are dealing with trauma. So when schools were closed, things were happening.
Right.
Financial hardship, people passing away as a result of a global pandemic. And those are things that we had to greet students and our adults when they came back on campus. To the best of our abilities, while we were closed, we still provided those supports, whether it be virtual or home visits. So now that students are back, it's getting reacclimated with community. It is really teasing out the trauma that exists and trying to figure out the best way to meet and support. We can spend a whole entire additional segment thinking about learning loss and getting kids back on track. It's just a really, really heavy lift. And when I think about it from the student perspective, whether you talk about trauma or not being around friends, not being around your teachers that you love, it's really difficult. When I think about it from the adult perspective, it's difficult there too. So we have an entire community at all levels of the organization still navigating a pandemic, and God willing, we're closer to end than beginning. And it's something that'll impact all of our communities for years. Yeah. Years.
I do have some statistics here, Stephanie, and we were talking about, I believe, Chad, you brought up some of these, thinking about how 90% students of color, 82% of which are Latino, 77%, we talked about qualify for free and reduced price lunch program, kind of painting a picture of what Arizona's future and adult population will look like if what we're talking about here doesn't change. Stephanie.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is if we don't get it right, if we don't invest strategically, build smart partnerships, and make sure that collectively as leaders in the community, we are rallying behind our communities that need the most support, that need the most investment, it's not going to be a really great economic future. Arizona, one thing that we say, we have a moral imperative to support our kids in our community, but we also have a real economic imperative. So if in 10 years, as Dr. Gestson said, Phoenix is almost 80% low income, and then if in 20 years, Arizona is almost 80% low income, the reaction from business community when we share those statistics with them is like, oh my goodness, what do we do? And I hope that these conversations really start to garner a real sense of urgency that we have all been feeling for a really long time, because we know that that these challenges and the barriers that come with poverty and the impacts on educational attainment, they are correlated, they are connected. And we have to, get beyond the silos of advocacy in the advocacy world. If I'm talking about education advocacy, I should also be talking about the impacts of food insecurity, of housing, of poverty, of hunger and homelessness. All of these things, we have to have a more thoughtful, smarter, strategic conversation about how we support a whole community, because that's what's going to build a more vibrant Arizona that we're dreaming about. And without that real, broader conversation, broader coalition, it's going to paint a very dire economic future for the state.
And Dr. Gestson, I want to ask you, because before we came out here, we were talking about this, and I said, okay, moving forward, obviously we're in a situation now where it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel comfortable. But if I'm I'm not in the education space, but I am a business leader, or I am a parent, I am committed to my community in some way, what can I be doing? What should I be doing at this point?
Yeah, I think the reality is everybody has to be doing something. Everybody should and everybody has to. And the truth is we just need to play the role that we currently sit in. If we're a parent, we ask you to be more engaged than ever before in your child's education. If you're in the workforce, you as an employee need to get engaged in this work. Get your employer to get engaged in this work. If you're lucky enough to be registered to vote, vote. Vote on things that matter to our communities, to our kids, to the future. Maybe you're in the legislature, you're in policy, you're an elected official. If we all play our role and understand this inextricable link between education and economy, and then be really clear about the levels of poverty sitting in our communities and our zip codes, and really clear about the connection to today's poverty, to tomorrow's economy, we all must play a role, and we all can play a role.
Good. Wholeheartedly agree. We don't have an education problem. That is a misnomer. We have a poverty problem.
But you hear that all the time.
You hear it all the time. People often talk in vacuums, and as I earlier mentioned, like learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so, even from from an altruistic perspective, like I want our kids to have the best experiences possible. If you don't operate from that perspective, maybe it's a different lens. I would imagine, we all want the best for our state of Arizona. And from a human component, for me, that means the best opportunities for all kids. And the best investment we can make is in our kids. When we think about the economic prosperity of our state. So that has to ring a bell no matter where you sit, what side of the aisle, what's important for you. If we want a vibrant, healthy, economically prosperous state, that there's a reason to invest in education and realize that it doesn't exist in a silo.
Stephanie, you can wrap us up here. What a great conversation we've had.
This has been so great, and I am so grateful for the time and the space to share these ideas and the challenges that we're grappling with. I really do think that there is a moment that we are in right now as we are coming out of the pandemic. We have a real opportunity, and I always want to lead from the lens of hope, and I hope that we can close that conversation that way, that while the challenges are great, the leaders are greater. The leaders of systems are doing incredible work out there, and our children are just brilliant. The young people keep me hopeful. Our families, our parents keep me hopeful because they are persevering, they are pushing through. And we just have to make sure collectively as a community that we come together, that we break down the silos between education, healthcare, economy, jobs, opportunity, all of the challenges that exist out there, and that we start to create smarter solutions, have more thoughtful conversation about how we can be better partners, how different stakeholders can come in and support students, what role we all play in advancing these solutions and coming together to solve these really big challenges. Because like I said, while the challenges are great, the leadership is greater, and I know that to be true as someone who is good friends with these guys who are leading our systems. We will get through this, we can get through this, and it is going to take all of us coming together around these comprehensive, thoughtful solutions.
So well said, and truly appreciate the conversation. Obviously leaving me here thinking of what role I can play better. Thank you so much for giving us that perspective and having these conversations beyond this panel today. We do want to thank, we have the Garcia Family Foundation, right, Stephanie?
Yes.
They're the ones who have stepped in to sponsor this, so I know you want to say a word about them.
Yes, incredibly grateful to the Garcia Family Foundation. It is because of their support that we are able to host these conversations, and I'm super grateful for the investment that they were able to make in this series.
And a reminder, we'll be building on this conversation every month, bringing you a deeper dive around each of the topics. So thank you so much for joining us, and make sure you tune in next month as we discuss how lack of access to quality healthcare impacts student learning. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.